joining us for this fourth and final episode of this season of the ReFaB Conversations podcast. In this episode, we discuss the changes needed to increase the availability of foster care placements for children with disabilities in Bulgaria. We also discuss the pressing issue of care for young people in foster care with high support needs when they reach age 18 and the barriers to independent living in society today. So, let's hear the discussion. We've acknowledged, okay, foster care is a really good alternative to residential care, but how can we be working now to improve the accessibility? Is it really realistic for so many children who are currently in residential care to be moved to foster care? And if it's really realistic, how can we be working now? How should we be working to increase that accessibility?
As researchers, we often hear this phrase, there are certain children that will not be possible to be taken care of outside residential care. So this is very interesting phrase because to me personally, it implies that there are certain children that are not suitable for family care, which is simply not true. It's even nonsense because each and every child has been born into a family. So the family care is appropriate for each and every child. But yet we somehow assume that there are certain cases that cannot be treated in this way. I mean, I find this a really major obstacle that we need to overcome in widening the scope of foster care in Bulgaria.
I really like what Sarah presented as personal expertise, or how do you call it, Sarah? The experience that people gain as they take a child and they are prepared to take on a bigger challenge, and then they're prepared to take on a bigger challenge because they practice and they develop skills. There was a term for that.
Special competence.
Special competence. Yes, thank you. As a practitioner, we see the resource in people developing this special competence with every next placement. Very few people will approach foster care and they would say, we want disabled children. This could happen, but usually there are some very personal reasons. Maybe they've lost a child with disability. Maybe they've had a disabled child in the extended family, and they have some sentiment for this category of children. Usually people want to become foster parents and to have children who are easy to manage, who can fit in with their family life. But with every next placement, they can gain the confidence to take teenagers, to take children with more profound disabilities. We have had foster parents who took children, let's say with cerebral palsy. They were adopted, and then they wanted children, Down syndrome children, and then they wanted a bigger challenge because they felt good about themselves, because they coped, they gained the expertise, and then they can even look after other types of children. So our resource for the most difficult to place children are the existing foster parents. We need to recruit more foster parents to bring them on board of the foster care as a vocation, as a way of life, and gradually work them up towards gaining competencies and willing and wishing to take more complex children. This is my suggestion from my practice and from a very practical point of view.
Yeah, absolutely agree. Yes, I think that this is something that we definitely has to invest in foster families who are already to try to enlarge the group of these people, these families, because they really after year by year they make more experience and could deal with more difficult and challenging cases.
Yeah, so this is about, recognizing foster parents as having this type of competence, expertise, and it's a difficult concept to get your head around, really, because fostering is a job which really crosses boundaries. It crosses the boundaries of work and care. Is it right to see foster parenting as a professional job? It's not a 9-to-5 role, but at the same time, just because a foster parent is doing a caring job that is paid for, it doesn't mean that they don't have some professional skills or expertise which they bring into their role. And so I think definitely some work needs to be done in terms of perceptions about this, both in the public and professional sphere. Not to say foster care should be completely professionalized and seen as this career which you need degrees and a lot of prior training for, but actually something which happens more organically, and expertise which is developed based on experience, but is then actually recognized as being expertise. Like I said before, expertise in everyday life. So thank you for your comments about that. A topic which is increasingly coming to my attention now is what happens to children or young people when they are in foster care and they reach age 18. Foster care is often seen in this context as a short-term measure. It's not popular for foster children to go into a foster placement and be there for a long-term placement. It's not necessarily seen as the right thing to do. And also we don't see a lot in the Bulgarian context, children going into foster care and then being adopted in their foster families anymore. But what is happening now is that children are staying there. So children who don't get adopted or reintegrated are more commonly staying in foster care until they're 18 years old. And what's being brought to my attention more and more in these days is a gap in what happens when children reach 18. For children with complex disabilities, the only option is institutionalization in an adult institution. And I just wondered, in your experiences, what do you currently see is happening in this field, and what kind of work needs to be done here?
Well, I first of all, I would like to say that again, foster care is part of the whole system for support and providing care for children and families. And actually part of the foster families and any other service, residential service, is to prepare for independent life of the care users. And I support this idea. I think that the care is not need to be forever, and the services for children has to prepare young people to start to live independently, maybe with some transitional period, transitional support. But somehow this problem is very, very significant for children with more severe disabilities, which are very, very much dependent from the care of somebody else. So they are not able to eat independently. Somebody has to feed them. Somebody has to go with them on the walk. Otherwise, they will stay in some closed space. I'm talking for these cases which are more severe and dependent from the care of other people. If we want to stimulate for more foster families, more foster care for children with more severe disabilities, because they are the most vulnerable children in risk to be institutionalized and to be separated from the family and not to live in family environment, we have to think about what will happen when they grow up, because they will grow up. What will happen with them? I don't think that they have to stay always in this family, because the natural way of living is that a person with or without disability has to start to live independent, more or less, depends of the. But there are many services in UK, especially Northern Ireland, in Netherlands, about supporting independent living of a person with disability as much as possible in accordance with the specific of disabilities. But the idea that we are talking here only for some residential groups, and I know that we have so-called protective house, which is something like independent living. But again, children with more severe disabilities, they have to be, of course, teach and support to develop some skills, independent skills. But for most of them, they will need some kind of support, assistant, or some another services that will be, but not as a residential, a service to support their independent living. And that's why I think that, again, it is part of the whole system of care, and even not only care for children, but also for these care leavers, because they grow up 19, 20, 22. If you spend all time of childhood in foster family or in some residential group, then in foster family, you need more specific, more specialized support services to support your transition to independent life. And for persons with more severe disabilities, this is even more difficult, because at this stage, I think that in Bulgaria, we don't have the system who support independent living of persons with disabilities. So I don't have really answer of this, but I somehow think that this is going to be a serious problem that we have to think how to solve in the future.
Yes, so in terms of children who are now successfully being placed in foster care, are experiencing life in a foster family, what I hear you're saying, Bисser, is unless these children, as they become young adults, are prepared for independent life, the work of deinstitutionalizing the care for children so that it's family-based care when they reach adulthood, a lot of the time the only option is placement in institutional care. And I don't know if anybody else has come across people saying this, but I've certainly heard people say, well, what's the point in foster care for these children? Why should we put them in families if when they turn 18, they're going to end up in an institution anyway? And of course, that's such a negative attitude to take. But it kind of highlights the need. Actually, yeah, we shouldn't be ignoring the issue of what happens when children reach adulthood. And how are we going to be working on developing independent living for these young people in the future? Does anybody else have anything to add on that before we bring this discussion to a close?
Very briefly, from experience with foster parents and children with disabilities, we also have instances where children have reached adulthood in the foster care. They've not been adopted, they've not been rescinded to residential care. And the foster parents are stuck because they don't receive money anymore for the child. They're not foster parents officially anymore of the child. And they don't want to place the child in adult residential care. And they say, what do? We love that child. It's hard on us because we have grown old with the child and our financial situation is not great, but we don't have the heart to abandon the child. We have looked after all their childhood, and they come to us and they ask us what to do. So yes, independent living or providing some other type of support, because there is no problem with some very needy and dependent and disabled young people to stay on, but there should be some provisions for them being cared in the same family as adults. I don't see anything wrong with that, because this is what happens with some very disabled birth children. They just stay in the family and the whole extended family unites around their care.
So I suppose, again, what's coming through here is the need for a bit more diversity within the system based on people's needs. Like, Galia, what you've referred to before as a one-size-fits-all approach doesn't really work. There needs to be more variation in what's accepted and what we see in policy for individual cases or types of children. So and extending the care that you can receive in foster care beyond 18 may be appropriate for some types of children in these cases. Thank you for watching or listening to this fourth and final episode of the ReFaB Conversations podcast. We hope these discussions have been interesting and useful for you in whichever sphere of practice you are working. In this season, we have heard from experts in foster care about current issues in the development of foster care and foster care provision for children with disabilities. We have also heard about the important and life-changing role that foster parents have when caring for children with disabilities. As a final message from this podcast series, we would like to communicate once again the importance of family for every child. As we have heard from the perspective of the guests on this podcast, the foster family is not a replacement of institutional care. It is so much more than that. Going forward, we need to take seriously the support needs of foster parents so that more children can find belonging in a family environment, and so that we can put an end to the over-reliance on residential care. If you would like to share your thoughts on the topics which have been covered in this podcast series, please fill in the form linked below this video. You can also click the links below for more information and resources related to the topic of foster care for children with disabilities in Bulgaria. Thanks again for joining us.